Several jokes in President Barack Obama's address at the 2016 White House Correspondents' Dinner targeted Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders was running a surprisingly strong campaign against the Democratic Party's presumptive presidential nominee, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. After a few shout-outs to celebrities and politicians, Obama turned to the subject of Sanders, saying,
"A lot of folks have been surprised by the Bernie phenomenon, especially his appeal to young people, but not me. I get it. Just recently, a young person came up to me and said she was sick of politicians standing in the way of her dreams. As if we were actually going to let Malia go to Burning Man this year. Was not going to happen. Bernie might have let her go, not us. I am hurt, though, Bernie, that you've been distancing yourself a little from me. I mean, that's just not something that you do to your comrade.
The last joke points to the socialist opening Sanders' campaign cut into U.S. politics. At first glance, the joke seems like red baiting. Obama's thinly veiled reminder that Sanders was a self-identified socialist and thus unacceptable to the U.S. political class. But perhaps not. Maybe it was a reminder for the audience that Sanders wasn't a member of the Democratic Party, and so he wasn't Obama's party comrade at all. Sanders wanted the Democratic nomination for president, but he wasn't actually a Democrat. There's also a third way of reading the joke. Recall how persistently the U.S. right red-baited Obama, accusing him of being a communist or socialist. For 8 years, the right excoriated the country's first black president as the most radical left-wing official ever to inhabit the White House. Mocking Comrade Obama, the right associated Obama with Lenin and Stalin, Che and Mao. Read this way, the joke points not to Sanders as a comrade, but to Obama as a comrade. Obama could have been referring to himself as Sanders' comrade, as someone who shares with Sanders a common political horizon, the emancipatory, egalitarian horizon denoted by the term comrade. If it were on the same side, with Obama being Sanders' comrade, then Obama should have been able to expect a little solidarity. The joke worked because everybody in the room, from celebrities to Washington insiders to media moguls, knew full well that Obama wasn't a comrade. He doesn't come close to sharing Sanders' politics, even if the right can't tell the difference between them. The term comrade indexes a political relation, a set of expectations for action toward a common goal. It highlights the sameness of those on the same side. No matter the differences, comrades stand together. As Obama's joke implies, when you share politics, you don't generally distance yourself from your comrades. Comradeship binds action, and in this binding, this solidarity, it collectivizes and directs action in light of a shared vision for the future. For communists, this is the egalitarian future of a society emancipated from the determinations of private property and capitalism, and reorganized according to the free association, common benefit, and collective decisions of the producers. But the term comrade predates its use by communists and socialists. In Romance languages, comrade first appears in the 16th century to designate one who shares a room with another. Juan A. Herrero Brasas cites a Spanish historical linguistic dictionary's definition of the term. Camarada is someone who is so close to another man that he eats and sleeps in the same house with him. In French, the term was originally feminine, camarade, and referred to a barracks or room shared by soldiers. Etymologically, comrade refers from camera, the Latin word for room, chamber, and vault. The technical connotation of vault indexes a generic function, the structure that produces a particular space and holds it open. A chamber or room is a repeatable structure that takes its form by producing an inside separate from an outside, and providing a supported cover for those underneath it. Sharing a room, sharing a space, generates a closeness, an intensity of feeling and expectation of solidarity that differentiates those on one side from those on the other. Comradeship is a political relation of supported cover. Interested in comrade as a mode of address, carrier of expectations, and figure belonging in the communist and socialist traditions, I emphasize the comrade as a generic figure of the political relation between those on the same side of a political struggle. Comrades are those who tie themselves together instrumentally for a common purpose. If we want to win, and we have to win, we must act together. As Angela Davis describes her decision to join the Communist Party, I wanted an anchor, a base, a mooring. I needed comrades with whom I could share a common ideology. I was tired of ephemeral ad hoc groups that fell apart when faced with the slightest difficulty, tired of men who measured their sexual height by women's intellectual genuflection. It wasn't that I was fearless, but I knew that to win, we had to fight, and the fight that would win was the one collectively waged by the masses of our people and working people in general. I knew that this fight had to be led by a group, a party with more permanence in its membership and structure, and substance in its ideology. Comrades are those you can count on. You share enough of a common ideology, enough of a commitment to common principles and goals to do more than one-off actions. Together you can fight the long fight. As comrades, our actions are voluntary, but they are not always of our own choosing. Comrades have to be able to count on each other, even when we don't like each other and even when we disagree. We do what needs to be done because we owe it to our comrades. In The Romance of American Communism, Vivian Gornick reports the words of a former member of the Communist Party USA, or CPUSA, who hated the daily grind of selling papers and canvassing expected of party cadre, but nevertheless, according to her, I did it. I did it because if I didn't do it, I couldn't face my comrades the next day. And we all did it for the same reason. We were accountable to each other. Put in psychoanalytic terms, the comrade functions as an ego ideal, the point from which party members assess themselves as doing important, meaningful work. Being accountable to another entails seeing your actions through their eyes. Are you letting them down, or are you doing work that they respect and admire? In Crowds and Party, I present the good comrade as an ideal ego, that is to say, as how party members imagine themselves. They may imagine themselves as thrilling orators, brilliant polemicists, skilled organizers, or courageous militants. In contrast with my discussion here in the current book, I draw out how the comrade also functions as an ego ideal, the perspective that party members, and often fellow travelers, take toward themselves. This perspective is the effect of belonging on the same side as it works back on those who have committed themselves to common struggle. The comrade is a symbolic as well as an imaginary figure, and it is the symbolic dimension of ego ideal I focus on here. My thinking about the comrade as a generic figure for those on the same side flows out of my work on communism as the horizon of left politics, and my work on the party as the political form necessary for this politics. To see our political horizon as communist is to highlight the emancipatory, egalitarian struggle of the proletarianized against capitalist exploitation, that is, against the determination of life by market forces, by value, by the division of labor on the basis of sex and race, by imperialism, theorized by Lenin in terms of the dominance of monopoly and finance capital, and by neocolonialism, theorized by Nkrumah as the last stage of imperialism. Today we see this horizon in struggles such as those led by women of color against police violence, white supremacy, and the murder and incarceration of black, brown, and working class people. We see it in the infrastructure battles around pipelines, climate justice, and barely habitable cities with undrinkable water and contaminated soil. We see it in the array of social reproduction struggles against debt, foreclosure, privatization, and for free, quality public housing, childcare, education, transportation, healthcare, and other basic services. We see it in the ongoing fight of LGBTQ people against harassment, discrimination, and oppression. It is readily apparent today that the communist horizon is the horizon of political struggle not for the nation, but for the world. It is an international horizon. This is evident in the antagonism between the rights of immigrants and refugees and intensified nationalisms, in the necessity of a global response to planetary warming, and in anti-imperialist, decolonization, and peace movements. In these examples, communism is a force of negativity, the negation of the global capitalist present. Communism is also the name for the positive alternative to capitalism's permanent and expanding exploitation, crisis, and immiseration, the name of a system of production based on meeting social needs, from each according to ability to each according to need. to paraphrase Marx's famous slogan, in a way that is collectively determined and carried out by the producers. This positive dimension of communism attends to social relations, to how people treat each other, animals, things, and the world around them. Building communism entails more than resistance and riot. It requires the emancipated, egalitarian organization of collective life. With respect to the party, intellectuals on the contemporary left tend to extract the party from the aspirations and accomplishments it enabled. Communist philosophers who disagree on a slew of theoretical questions, such as Antonio Negri and Alain Badiou, converge on the organizational question: no party. The party has been rejected as authoritarian, as outmoded, as ill-fitting a society of networks. Every other mode of political association may be revised, renewed, rethought, or reimagined except for the Party of Communists. This rejection of the party as a form for left politics is a mistake. It ignores the effects of association on those engaged in common struggle. It fails to learn from the everyday experiences of generations of activists, organizers, and revolutionaries. It relies on a narrow, fantasied notion of the party as a totalitarian machine. It neglects the courage, enthusiasm, and achievements of millions of party members for over a century. Rejection of the party form has been left dogmatism for the last 30 years and has gotten us nowhere. Fortunately, the movements of the squares in Greece and Spain, as well as lessons from the successes and limits of the Occupy movement, have pushed against this left dogmatism. They have re-energized interest in the party as a political form that can scale. A form that is flexible, adaptive, and expansive enough to endure beyond the joyous and disruptive moments of crowds in the streets. A theory of the Comrade contributes to this renewal by drawing out the ways that shared commitment to a common struggle generates new strengths and new capacities. Over and against the reduction of party relations to the relations between the leaders and the led, Comrade attends to the effects of political belonging on those on the same side of a political struggle. As we fight together for a world free of exploitation, oppression, and bigotry, we have to be able to trust and count on each other. Comrade names this relation. The comrade relation remakes the place from which one sees what it is possible to see and what possibilities can appear. It enables the revaluation of work and time, what one does and for whom one does it. Is one's work done for the people or for the bosses? Is it voluntary or done because one has to work? Does one work for personal provisions or for a collective good? We should recall Marx's lyrical description of communism in which work becomes, quote, life's prime want. We want a glimpse of that in comradeship. One wants to do political work. You don't want to let down your comrades. You see the value of your work through their eyes, your new collective eyes. Work determined not by markets but by shared commitments becomes fulfilling. French communist philosopher and militant Bernard Asp discusses the problem of contemporary capitalism as a loss of common time, that is, the loss of an experience of time generated and enjoyed through our collective being together. From holidays to meals to breaks, whatever common time we have is synchronized and enclosed in forms for capitalist appropriation. Communicative capitalism's apps and trackers amplify this process such that the time of consumption can be measured in much the same way that Taylorism measured the time of production. How long did a viewer spend on a particular web page? Did a person watch a whole ad or click off of it after 5 seconds? In contrast, the common action that is the actuality of communist movement induces a collective change in capacities, breaking from capitalism's 24/7 injunctions to produce and consume for the bosses and owners. The discipline of common struggle expands possibilities for action and intensifies the sense of its necessity. The comrade is a figure for the relation through which this transformation of work and time occurs. How do we imagine political work? Under conditions where political change seems completely out of reach, we might imagine political work as self-transformation. At the very least, we can work on ourselves. In the intensely mediated networks of communicative capitalism, we might see our social media engagements as a kind of activism, where Twitter and Facebook function as important sites of struggle. Perhaps we understand writing as important political work and hammer out opinion pieces, letters to the editors, and manifestos. When we imagine political work, we often take electoral politics as our frame of reference, focusing on voting, lawn signs, bumper stickers, and campaign buttons. Or we think of activists as those who arrange phone banks, canvass door to door, and set up rallies. In yet another political imaginary, we might envision political work as study, whether done alone or with others. We might imagine political work as cultural production, the building of new communities, spaces and ways of seeing. Our imaginary might have a militant or even militarist inflection. Political work is carried out through marches, occupations, strikes and blockades, through civil disobedience, direct action, and covert operations. Even with the recognition of the wide array of political activities, the ways people use them to respond to specific situations and capacities, and how they combine to enhance each other, we might still imagine radical political work as punching a Nazi in the face. Throughout these various actions and activities, how are the relations among those fighting on the same side imagined? How did the activists and organizers, militants and revolutionaries relate to one another? During the weeks and months when the Occupy movement was at its peak, relations with others were often infused with a joyous sense of being together, with enthusiasm for the collective co-creation of new patterns of action and ways of living. But the feeling didn't last. The pressures of organizing diverse people in politics under conditions of police repression and real material need wore down even the most committed activists. Since then, on social media and across the broader left, relations among the politically engaged have again become tense and conflicted, often along lines of race and gender. Dispersed and disorganized, we're uncertain of whom to trust and what to expect. We encounter contradictory injunctions to self-care and call out. Suspicion undermines support. Exhaustion displaces enthusiasm. Attention to comradeship, to the ways that shared expectations make political work not just possible, but also gratifying, may help redirect our energies back to our common struggle. As former CPUSA member David Ross explained to Gornick, I knew that I could never feel passionately about the new movements as I had about the old. I realized the CP has provided me with a sense of comradeship I would never have again, and that without that comradeship, I could never be political. For Ross, the Communist Party is what made Marxism. The party gave Marxism life, political purpose. This life-giving capacity came from comradeship. Ross continues, the idea of politics as simply a diffused consciousness linked only to personal integrity is, anathema to me. His description of politics as a diffused consciousness linked only to personal integrity fits today's left milieux. Perhaps, then, his remedy, comradeship, will as well. Various people have told me their stories of feeling a rush of warmth when they were first welcomed into their party as a comrade. I've had this feeling myself. In his memoir Incognegro, a memoir of exile and apartheid, the theorist Frank Wilderson, a former member of Umkhonto we Sizwe, or MK, the armed wing of the African National Congress (ANC), describes his first meeting with Chris Hani, the leader of the South African Communist Party and the chief of staff of MK. Wilderson writes, I beamed like a schoolboy when he called me comrade. Wilderson chides himself for what he calls a childish need for recognition. Perhaps because he still puts Hani on a pedestal, he feels exposed in his enjoyment of the egalitarian disruption of comradeship. Wilderson hasn't yet internalized the idea that he and Hani are political equals. Comrade holds out an equalizing promise, and when that promise is fulfilled, we confront our own continuing yet unwanted attachments to hierarchy, prestige, inadequacy. Accepting equality takes courage. Wilderson's joy in hearing Hani call him comrade contrasts sharply with another instance Wilderson recounts where comrade was the term of address. In 1994, shortly before Wilderson was forced to leave South Africa, he encountered Nelson Mandela at an event hosted by Tribute magazine. After Mandela's public remarks, Wilderson asked a question in which he addressed Mandela as comrade. Not Mr. Mandela, not sir, like the fawning advertising mogul who asked the first question. Comrade Mandela. It stitched him back into the militant garb he'd shed since the day he left prison. Wilderson's recollection shows how Comrade's equalizing insistence can be aggressive, an imposition of discipline. This is part of its power. Addressing another as comrade reminds them that something is expected of them. Discipline and joy are two sides of the same coin, two aspects of comradeship as a mode of political belonging. As a form of address, figure of political relation, and carrier of expectations, Comrade disrupts capitalist society's hierarchical identifications of sex, race, and class. It insists on the equalizing sameness of those on the same side of a political struggle, and renders that equalizing sameness productive of new modes of work and belonging. In this respect, Comrade is carrier of utopian longings in the sense theorized by Kathy Weeks. Weeks presents the utopian form as carrying out two functions. One function is to alter our connection to the present, while the other is to shift our relationship to the future. One is productive of estrangement, the other of hope. The first function mobilizes the negativity of disidentification and disinvestment. Present relations become strange, less binding on our sense of possibility. The second function redirects our attention and energies toward an open future, providing a vision or glimmer of a better world. The power of Comrade is in how it negates old relations and promises new ones. The promise itself ushers them in, welcoming the new comrade into relations irreducible to their broader setting.